This is to paint the picture, bleak or otherwise.
A grim report from the province's financial watchdog. The wait list for long-term care beds will continue to grow, peaking at over 40,000 people next year. It was the Ford government's biggest budget promise to create 15,000 new long-term care beds, but according to a new report by Ontario's Financial Accountability Officer, it's not enough to cut down on a growing wait list. Lisa Shing explains.
The wait list for a long-term care bed will continue to rise.
A sobering look at Ontario's long-term care crunch by Ontario's Financial Accountability Office. It reviewed the province's promise to create 15,000 new long-term care spaces over 5 years. It found Ontario's wait list for beds will peak in the next couple of years, despite that promise.
It is what it is, right? I guess that's the role of this office is to paint the picture, bleak or otherwise.
And even if those 15,000 beds get built, the province would need to add 55,000 more just to maintain the ballooning wait list. So why is there such a crunch? The report says the aging population is growing at a much faster rate than long-term care beds are being added to the system, and the government is blaming that on the Liberals.
We look back on 15 years of Liberal neglect in the long-term care sector, 15 years of runway that we would have been able to develop the beds and make that capacity.
In the mid-2000s, they added 10,000, but the number of new beds didn't increase by much in the last few years of Liberal rule.
I reject the notion that we did nothing. We did a lot. And was it enough? No. Do we need to do more? Yes.
The solution is not to cut hospital funding, which is what the Conservatives are doing.
The government says it's finding ways for seniors to receive care at home. The FAO report indicates the shortage is adding to the stress on Ontario hospitals. It found many patients are only there because they're waiting for a long-term care space to open up. Lisa Shing, CBC News, Toronto.
Major changes could be coming to Ontario's autism services. That's if the province takes on a panel's recommendations of sweeping changes to improve the system.
This is a complex issue, and I think when you have those 20 people from all walks of life around that table, you're going to get all kinds of perspectives and points of view, and they came together to agree on this report and these recommendations, and they will be the basis of our Ontario Autism program going forward.
The changes would allow for easier access to services. They would also provide families with more support and widen the treatment options for children with autism. This comes after an uproar over a revamp to the program in February. The province created the advisory review panel after admitting the initial changes were not working.
Minister Todd Smith was very proud and very open with us and gave us full range to help him create this truly individually needs-based program. And he gave us free range to literally rebuild a program, and we did that with confidence and with emotion and with blood, sweat and tears.
The government says it will review the report and aim to have the changes in place by 2020 in April, although some of the recommendations could happen much earlier. Public elementary teachers in Toronto and York Region will cast ballots tonight over whether or not to strike.
We believe strongly together in publicly funded public education and in a government that agrees that that's important, that there be no erosion to our world-class education system. We're here to express how much that means to us, and we need to draw a line in the sand.
The Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario has been holding strike votes across the province since the end of September. This while the union is in contract negotiations with the province. Now, the overall strike vote results will be released in November. If teachers vote in favor of job action, it doesn't mean a strike would happen right away. The union says it's all part of a larger process.
Provincial officials recently scaled back funding cuts to childcare in Toronto, but today councillors say it's still not going far enough and they want a complete reversal from Queen's Park. Otherwise, they say, hundreds of childcare spaces are at risk.
We're not going to let down Toronto families, even if Doug Ford is prepared to.
I'm City Hall reporter Lauren Pelly, and I'll have that battle coming up.
Trial continued today in the alleged case of a gang sexual assault at College Street Bar 3 years ago. Today, the defense finished their cross-examination of the alleged victim, and one of the accused took the stand. Lorenda Redekop has more.
In the witness box, Gavin McMillan told the court the bar wasn't open to the public that night. It was a bartender training event, open to their friends and family. Here, the bar is set on fire. Previously, CBC News filmed McMillan doing that at the bar. His lawyer asked him, was there any part of that night, December 14th, 2016, that was not consensual? He answered, there's no doubt in my mind, it was all 100% consensual. And said about the alleged victim, she made it very clear she was into a submissive dominant relationship and that was her preference. He said he commented on the dog collar she was wearing and said his co-accused, bar manager Enzo de Jesus Carrasco, had a similar one. Most of the day, the woman, who can't be named due to a publication ban, continued her testimony, done via video from a different room in the courthouse. It was her fourth day giving evidence. The defense lawyer for De Jesus asked her about leaving the bar at close to 6 a.m. after hours of sex acts captured on security camera with the two men. The woman said she left, taking a taxi, and De Jesus jumped in, taking her to his place. His lawyer, Uma Kancharla, suggested the woman willingly went there, adding, you told him to delete the sex act with Gavin that had been captured on his phone. The alleged victim, sounding frustrated, said, why on earth would I do that? That would have helped me. That doesn't even make sense. The lawyer continued that De Jesus' cell phone video apparently showed her smiling, saying, make me do it. The 9 hours of security footage have no volume. At times, she appears to be a willing participant. She said she willingly did 2 lines of cocaine. Other times, she's seen stumbling and appearing to push the men away. At issue in this case is whether the woman consented or had the capacity to consent. De Jesus' lawyer also suggested she was taking non-prescription drugs at the time, a form of OxyContin called oxazepam. The woman forcefully disagreed. I don't take oxys and I don't have a reason to, she said. I've never taken oxys ever in my life. The trial continues tomorrow with more of McMillan's version of events. Lorenda Redicomp, CBC News, Toronto.
2 people remain in hospital with gunshot wounds, and it's not even clear if they were the intended targets of the bullets. Police say 2 shooters walked up to a home near Weston Road in Lawrence and just started firing into the building. Greg Ross is live there for us tonight. And Greg, a scary night for the people living in that rooming house.
It certainly was, Dwight. In fact, police just cleared this scene sometime early this morning. That's when people who live in this home were allowed to return, and many of them have, despite the fact that the outside of their house is riddled with bullet holes. You see those white evidence markers there on the outside of the door and the window. That's where those bullets entered the home just after 12:30 this morning. Many of the people that live in this neighborhood tell us that they were asleep at the time, but that's when police tell us that 2 masked gunmen walked up to this house and opened fire.
It's appalling.
That was Nancy Ampa's reaction after waking up with her young daughter this morning to the sound of gunshots. It happened in this quiet neighborhood near Weston Road and Lawrence Avenue, where Ampa says she has lived for more than 20 years.
Like, you don't wake up, it's supposed to be a safe street. I've lived here all my life. And to have kids around and hearing this is crazy. This is madness.
At least 8 shots were fired into this house just steps away from where Ampa lives. 2 people inside suffered gunshot wounds, a 44-year-old woman and a 71-year-old man.
But by all accounts, it does appear to be targeted. It's hard to say with certainty. Of course, further investigation will be required to say whether or not it was in fact targeted.
But police can't say if the man and woman were the intended targets or if it was somebody else in the house. Neighbors tell us that there are multiple people renting rooms in the home.
It is quite concerning that someone fired shots into a home without knowing exactly who was in the home.
We spoke to a woman who lives in a ground floor apartment with her daughter just inside this door. She didn't want to appear on camera out of fear for her safety, but she did show us the bullet holes inside her home.
I heard like 8 shots, one rapidly, one after the other. I heard the shots and then I stayed in my room for around 25 minutes until everything settled.
This man lives on the upper level of the house.
I never see nothing, but I just hear about 3 or 4 shots go off.
Both of the victims in this shooting were taken to hospital with serious injury. The woman's injuries were originally considered life-threatening. We've recently spoken to police. They tell us that she's been upgraded to serious but stable condition. We're told that the suspects ran from the scene towards Weston Road, which is that way. Police are in the process now of reviewing surveillance cameras from this area, and there are several homes here on this street that do have surveillance cameras that would have captured something from that shooting last night, Dwight.
Thank you, Greg. A 36-year-old man was shot and killed in his driveway last night. Ryan Lord was found just outside his home in Georgetown.
Investigators are looking into all possibilities, but at this point, we do not believe there's a larger threat to the public. We think this was a targeted shooting.
Police received reports of gunfire just after 11 p.m. One neighbor says he heard as many as 10 shots.
I was thinking it was fireworks, but it sounded too loud and too fast. So then I knew right away it was gunshots. I just moved into this place and I have 2 kids. And 2 doors down, somebody just got shot.
Health and police are urging anyone with information or surveillance video to get in touch with investigators or to leave an anonymous tip with Crime Stoppers. Do you live near a major road or highway? A new study out of the University of Toronto is raising concerns about the pollution you could be breathing in. We'll bring you that story in just a few minutes. I'm going to guess Colette is talking about rain today.
Yeah, you've got that right, Dwight. We are looking at significant rain. We already know we've got some wet weather out there, but it's actually going to get heavier in intensity. And because it's going to go on, although in waves for a while, we're looking at a special weather statement that is in place from now through to Friday. And guess what comes in between? Halloween, of course. So 30 to 50 millimeters before it does taper off as we get towards Friday morning. By the way, with some cold air in place, Friday morning, it could actually turn over to some light flurries. Yes, I said that. I'm talking for the GTA. And then the other thing with this will be the winds. So on the back side of the system, now this should be after the trick-or-treat hours tomorrow night, but overnight past midnight to Friday morning, some very, very strong winds with gusts exceeding 70 kilometers an hour. So if you do have Halloween decorations out, those will be something you'll want to pull in as soon as trick-or-treat hours are over and not leave them there until we get towards Friday morning. Look at, this is what's happening currently. So some lighter bands coming through the city, starting to get heavier, and some heavier waves are going to be pushing in. So we'll see that through the overnight. Then, as we go through to tomorrow morning, we'll start to see some of the precipitation at times lightening up a little bit, so not as strong. But watch what happens. It comes back in, some heavy rains later morning, mid-morning, towards late morning. Then 6 o'clock, getting close to those trick-or-treat hours. It does look like eastern sections of the GTA still into the rain, but a dry slot may just come in here for an hour or two to get in some trick-or-treating before we see it pushing out. And it does leave us on Friday, but as I say, with some cold air in place, any leftover moisture, Dwight, we may be seeing some of those white, fluffy things in our skies.
Don't you dare.
I didn't say it, I just described it.
Thanks, Colette.
Yeah, more coming up on this, Dwight, including those winds and the look at the rain accumulations.
We know we can't escape it. We'll check back with you in a bit.
Sounds good.
You are looking at the ever-expanding wildfires in California. This is Simi Valley in Ventura County, and that's a new wildfire. The Easy Fire erupted today north of Los Angeles. It's the 3rd major fire burning across California right now, and about 26 million Americans are in fire risk zones from the Pacific coast to neighboring Arizona.
They used to call these lifetime fires, but now we get them every year.
High winds fanning the flames of this fire burning in the suburbs of Los Angeles. Across California, horse barns and homes are being evacuated, and the fires surround the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. The hilltop site has sprinklers offering some protection, but nearby homes could burn. Fire crews are making some progress in the battle. The biggest wildfire, the Kincaid fire burning in Sonoma County, north of San Francisco, is now about 30% contained. Aaron Collins has more from inside the fire zone.
The damage has been done here at this winery, but firefighters in Sonoma County are breathing a sigh of relief today. And that's because near record winds didn't blow as hard as feared overnight. And that means crews were able to make some progress containing fires in this part of California. Officials say that they now have about 30% of the Kincaid fire contained, about twice as much as yesterday. And while winds in parts of this county are still moving at around 100 kilometers an hour, they're expected to calm down throughout the day. So the weather is expected to improve here, helping firefighters press their advantage against this fire, which has already burned about 30,000 hectares. But it's not all good news. Flames are still threatening tens of thousands of structures across the state, including the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. And no rain is expected for at least a week here, so those dry conditions mean another flare-up is possible at any time.
It only takes one ember to blow downwind to start another fire.
About 150,000 people remain evacuated from their homes in this part of Northern California. Almost 90 homes have burned to the ground. Thankfully, no one has died, but folks in this part of California are still struggling to save horses and other livestock. Still, despite the struggles, many evacuees remain upbeat.
We've been out of the house since Saturday, so it's been a little rough in the van with all the kids, and it's kind of cold at night, but other than that, it's good.
So, most people aren't yet able to return home, but as the smoke begins to clear here, evacuees and the firefighters working to save their homes are seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. Aaron Collins, CBC News, near Jimtown, California.
Back here at home, a new national study is raising concern about the pollution millions of Canadians are breathing in from roadway traffic. Nearly a third of the country's population lives near major arteries, and researchers have found out more about the particles that traffic is spewing, and they say one type of vehicle is especially cause for concern. Thomas Degla explains.
Every time Angela Saradnicki leaves her downtown Toronto home, she comes face to face with a giant, the busy Gardiner Expressway, and all the pollution that comes with it.
I have to get facials more if I live in Toronto. I don't want to know what my lungs look like because it's just kind of like scary to think about.
Yes, this city may be all built up around such busy arteries, but Toronto's not alone. Across Canada, more than 10 million people live within 250 meters of a major road, and that's close enough to be affected by vehicle emissions. So says a new national study led by Professor Greg Evans at the University of Toronto.
And some of these instruments collect once every second, and we've been collecting data for 10 years.
They may not look like much, but those devices here and in Vancouver are measuring emissions from the traffic going by.
Every time we breathe, we're inhaling about 5 million of these particles.
Evans calls it a soup of pollutants, from nitrogen oxides to soot, plus microscopic particles from brake and tire wear. This public health expert says the harm may be invisible, but
the real public health impact comes because we have so many people who are exposed to a small amount of risk so many days of the year.
Researchers say part of the problem is Canadians are buying more pickups and SUVs, though the worst emitters are said to be big diesel trucks, their use fueled by the growth of online shopping. Take this road in Vancouver. Researchers found it's just as polluted as a much busier highway because of truck traffic.
It's just a small portion of the trucks that are operated poorly maintained, or have even been tampered with. And if we can get those off the roads, that'll make a major improvement.
For those living near major roads, there's no easy fix when just stepping outside means breathing in pollution. Thomas Daigle, CBC News, Toronto.
Oh, look at Buddy Boy on the right. He's got his cell phone right up to
right
him.
behind us in lane 3.
Right behind his lane? Look at him swaying.
Oh, look at that.
Look at that. Totally oblivious.
After the break, we go for a ride along with the OPP. In some areas, distracted driving now causes more deaths on the road than impaired driving, and is costing everyone more. We'll explain next.
The weather update is brought to you by Train, the most reliable heating and cooling brand. It's hard to stop a train.
The Transportation Safety Board released the findings of an investigation into a deadly helicopter crash in 2017. 4 Hydro One workers were killed when their helicopter went into an uncontrollable spin and crashed in Tweed. A canvas bag strapped to the outside of the helicopter wasn't secured properly. It came loose mid-flight, striking and breaking the aircraft's tail rotor. Today, the TSB said while they knew why the helicopter went down, their investigation helped identify other gaps in safety protocol, specifically when it comes to buckling up on board.
See from the picture that the shoulder harness had been taped up and wasn't available for use on that of flight. In this case, we were able to identify specifically that it was believed that the shoulder harness use was optional.
Investigators found that only 1 passenger was wearing a seatbelt. There also were no standards or training for securing tools outside the helicopter. Now, since the crash, Hydro One has made changes to their procedures. All across Canada, police say distracted driving is getting worse. That's despite stiffer penalties and aggressive awareness campaigns. A national survey recently found that the vast majority of Canadians know it's a problem. Recent data also suggests distracted driving can be more deadly than impaired driving. And Buckner looks at how police and insurance companies are joining forces to push back.
Yeah, she had something in her hand. She was swaying on her way up.
Ed Joustra of the Ontario Provincial Police and his colleague, Kevin McAllister, are in an unmarked vehicle on the lookout for distracted drivers.
Oh, look at Buddy Boy on the right. He's got his cell phone right up to
right
him.
behind us in lane 3.
Right, see his lane? Look at him swaying.
Oh, look at that.
Look at that. Totally oblivious.
McAllister gets pictures for use later in court.
Look, he's way over the rumble strip. He doesn't even care.
Did you get the shot? I got 1 shot. Yep, you are behind the correct vehicle. We just passed you.
2 cruisers are ahead of them, ready to intercept the vehicles they spot.
Vehicle stopped, Highway 401, Ontario.
It's a $615 fine.
Fines are increased. They're adding more penalties, suspensions, and people are still on their phones.
The Traffic Injury Research Foundation says in some jurisdictions there are now more fatalities caused by distracted driving than by impaired driving.
And what it does is it provides instant feedback on your driving behaviors.
Lisa Guglietti of the Cooperators says distracted driving is pushing up everyone's insurance premiums.
Distracted driving is contributing in some way, although we can't pinpoint the number, to the number of collisions that we're seeing, and as a result the cost of the pool is going up and therefore the premiums are going up as well.
All right, Mr. Joustra, don't be too hard on me.
The OPP's Ed Joustra gets financial help from a local insurance company for this, another strategy in his mission against distracted driving.
There you go, let's see. Oh, there's an accident already.
He goes out to high schools with a driving simulator.
So what's that start telling you about distracted driving?
That it's extremely dangerous.
Yes.
But is the corporate support enough to make a difference?
I don't think there's ever going to be enough. Unfortunately, right now, especially the perception, we have a lot of individuals that think they're fine to drive with a phone in their hand.
Right there. Hold it there.
His advice, put phones out of reach while driving to prevent injury or death and to help put the brakes on rising insurance premiums.
Sergeant Toms, you are behind the correct vehicle in lane.
Diane Buckner, CBC News, Cobourg, Ontario.
We used to walk all the neighbors together, but now people are scared. They don't want to go around in a dark street.
For 2 months, residents on a street in Birchmount have been left in the dark, both literally and figuratively. The street lights just don't work, and they aren't getting any answer as to why. We'll bring you their story after the break. A battle over childcare funding is still raging between City Hall and Queen's Park. Toronto City Council is now calling on the province to fully reverse its funding cuts. Premier Doug Ford's government just scaled back this year's changes, but councillors say hundreds of spaces are still at risk. City Hall reporter Lauren Pelly has the details.
West End mom Adele Halliday is on maternity leave with her second daughter, 6-month-old Amelia. She struggled to find affordable care for her first child before going back to work.
I do remember it being quite a challenge and really stressful around calling so many places and nobody having anything available.
She wound up getting a spot, but it cost her.
We had to go into debt. I know of people who, once they had their second child, then you're doubling your daycare costs if you don't get a subsidy, said it's not even worth it for me to go back to work.
Right now, childcare in Toronto costs around $22,000 each year for infants and around $17,000 for toddlers. For the city's affordable spaces, the wait list is already 17,000 families long. To fix that crunch, city officials are moving forward on dozens of new childcare projects, but there's concern provincial cuts could hinder efforts to offer hundreds of subsidized spots.
Earlier this year, Toronto was facing a $15 million funding cut from Queen's Park. But after months of pushback from the city, the province recently scaled that back to $5 million or less.
The change is just for next year. Councillors now want the province to reverse future changes to the funding model that sees Toronto footing more of the bill. For new parents on council, it's an issue that hits close to home.
We're expecting our first kid in 3 weeks. And when we found out that she was pregnant, the first thing we did, before calling her parents or mine or our siblings, we put ourselves on 7 childcare waiting lists. And we don't know if we're going to get a space.
Keon is now 5 months old. We are worried about making all the bills line up. And we're also saving and preparing for his childcare fees. There's a very good chance that we'll probably have to go into some debt to make sure that he has access to childcare.
Education Minister Stephen Lecce told us the province is investing in childcare in other ways, helping build new spaces and offering families a tax credit. Even so, Halliday worries what other parents could face in the years ahead.
We desperately need more childcare spaces, not less. And we need childcare to be affordable for everybody.
Lauren Pelly, CBC News, Toronto.
A downtown bistro has some choice words for the provincial government. They are trying to raise awareness of soaring property taxes through a cheeky new video.
Ontario's open for business? Zut alors! It's open for your friends, the elites, but for the people, it's shutting down. Small businesses in Toronto are being eaten alive by property tax. Au revoir, community. Bienvenue, banality.
The Select Bistro has operated in the city for more than 40 years. They moved to Wellington Street West in 2005. Since then, they say their taxes have gone up 551%, from $2,000 to $20,000 per month. They say under provincial law, they are taxed for the highest and best use of their property. And according to the latest assessment, that's a 12-story condo.
We just don't think it's fair. We'd like to be taxed based on who we are, not on what we could potentially be.
Our main streets are going to be nothing but condos or corporate stores because the ordinary individual, small business person, will not be able to stay in business.
Councillor Cole put forward a successful motion today asking the city to look at ways to protect small businesses from this tax. The city also committed to asking the province about changing the way properties are assessed. Currently, a provincial body determines the value of municipal properties like the Select Bistro. We are hearing from several residents in the Birchmount and Lawrence area who are trying to shine a light on a problem on their streets. They say for the past several weeks, they've been malfunctioning, leaving their neighborhood in complete darkness. As Kelly Ewan tells us, residents don't feel safe going outside.
It's not completely dark yet, but soon it will be. And Cindy Fuller doesn't expect this to turn on.
The fact that I cannot put my dogs on a leash at 10 o'clock at night and walk down the street before they go to bed is ridiculous.
And that's the least of her concerns.
But there are so many seniors on this street that if they're getting out of a wheel-trans or some other thing and their lights in their house are not on their porch, they're literally walking into complete darkness and they could fall and hurt themselves.
Residents on Beacon Road say the lights on their street and two others nearby, Maryfield Road and Vauxhall Drive, have been malfunctioning for about 2 months now, sometimes coming back on for a few days, only to go out again.
We used to walk all the neighbors together, but now people are scared. They don't want to go around in a dark street.
It's about 7 p.m. right now, and it's pretty pitch black. You probably can't really see me right now unless we turn on the camera light.
You never know if you can maybe step on something, you know.
Or worse, get mugged, says Christian Capaccio. He's an international exchange student living with Fuller's family. It takes him about 10 minutes to walk from the bus stop to the house.
The problem is, like, you never know what's going to happen, you know. It's like you can't barely see even like your hand, you know, like in front of you. To be honest with you, like sometimes we tend to get really nervous if I see somebody just walk in, you know, because you only see it's just like a shadow just passing by.
Residents say they've called Toronto Hydro, which told them it will need more time to investigate. In a statement to CBC, a spokesperson said, as the investigation into the underlying cause of the problem is ongoing, we're taking steps to implement temporary solutions to ensure that these streetlights remain on for parents and their children as trick-or-treating gets underway.
Just fixing it today for Halloween is great, but then in 3 days it'll go off again. So I don't want to spend my winter in the dark. To me, them investigating it now is a little bit late. This should have been fixed by now.
Kelda Yoon, CBC News, Toronto.
Oh, they better fix that for those kids in
Oh,
Halloween.
yeah.
It's going to be very upset in that community tomorrow night.
Yeah, that's right. And I hope folks won't be too upset, Dwight, by the weather conditions, at least forewarned, right? So you can get those costumes ready and make sure you've got some kind of protection for what we're going to be seeing in terms of the rainfall that is in our forecast. And we are talking about significant amounts when you put it all together. That's why earlier in the show I was showing you the special weather statement that is in place because of the storming conditions. So the amount of rain, 30 to 50 millimeters, and I'll show you more specifically for the GTA in just a moment here. Just know that it is going to intensify. It's been somewhat lighter in nature. We'll have some heavier bands coming through overnight tonight and into tomorrow. And eventually these winds are going to be ramping up too, so that some of the gusts are going to be, now this isn't for the trick-or-treat corridor there tomorrow evening, but after that they'll be over 70 kilometers an hour. So let's deal first of all with those winds. So here we go. As we're looking towards those important hours tomorrow evening, actually our wind flow, not too bad, not terribly strong. It's really when we go through the overnight to the morning hours on Friday, we're going to see some of these winds 70, 75, 80 kilometers an hour. Those are the gusts, not the sustained winds. But because of that, it's why I am recommending, if you do have maybe some cushions still out there with your outdoor furniture, but especially if you've got any Halloween kind of things out on the lawn, any kind of decorations, you want to bring those in tomorrow night and not wait to Friday morning. Don't leave them up. Don't delay on that. And then Friday later in the afternoon, those winds will let up. Now here, let's take it back to the present. Our current temperature is sitting there right around 7 degrees, and it's going to likely hold there. Might go up a degree and then kind of back down, sort of holding there through the overnight hours. Here's some of the heavier bands of rain, especially just back to the west as you get into some of these yellows and the oranges we're seeing here on the radar. So that's why I'm saying it comes in, it's been a little lighter, heavier stuff to come through yet, and more of it as we go into Thursday. Now, tomorrow morning, you can see, yeah, the cloud deck is there, but we may have a little bit of a break in the precipitation, just a little bit of a window. Watch what happens. Some heavier rain sort of towards mid-morning through there is going to push through our area. And then it does look like, okay, 6 o'clock, still a lot of wet conditions, like maybe a little bit of a dry slot in there, maybe. I know. We're really hoping for that for our trick-or-treaters, but the potential it will at least be a little bit lighter in terms of the intensity. And then on the backside with some cooler air, yeah, you saw that, some flurries possible into Friday morning. So windy on Friday morning, and also could see some of those white little snowflakes and some accumulations further to the north, by the way. But in terms of the rainfall, it's looking closer to that 30 millimeters for the GTA, not closer to the 50. Overnight tonight, as I said, those temperatures nearly steady, and we'll take a closer look at the exact hours in terms of the temperatures for trick-or-treaters, Dwight, coming up at the end of the show. Also, let's end on a positive note. This weekend, we get an extra hour of sleep.
Yeah, we like that, but you had to say it, didn't you? We heard you, you know.
Did you? Did I say snow? No, it's not snow. It's just flurries.
You said snowflakes. Thanks, Colette. We'll chat back with you later. You did.
All right. I'll look at the tape.
Toronto is full of rich music history. This city has been graced with countless legendary performances across all genres and decades in big and small venues. Now, a new book called The Flyer Vault documents 150 years of Toronto concert history. Earlier, I sat down with authors Daniel Tate and Rob Bowman to talk about how this book on Toronto's music scene came together.
Going back to the 90s, I was an avid raver, so I'd go to a lot of raves, and I would always collect these big, sophisticated flyers that used to be handed out all over the city. A few years later, I started working for a hip-hop concert company named REMG, and I just started collecting an obscene amount of flyers and posters just from this era. And I put it away, kind of forgot about it. About 15 years later, I rediscovered this trunk of flyers, which to me was like a time capsule for a special period of time in Toronto nightlife. And I realized that there's all this nostalgia, all this like wave of memories and stories that were kind of on these pieces of paper. So I created this Instagram account called The Flyer Vault. Started uploading it, it got really popular. A lot of people were just coming there and sharing stories.
That show, man, I remember that.
Well, that's the most common comment. I was there, and then they would, or I met my future wife at the coat check. Like all these random stories, and it kind of grew a life of its own. And fast forward to 2017, I started to realize that there's so much awesome history here that it'd be cool to put it into a book.
Are there some iconic posters in there that are just seminal moments in music history for our
Bob
town?
Marley's first show in Toronto on the Natty Dread Tour at Massey Hall, June 75.
Wow.
I was at that show, and it was a total game changer. There were other things like, you know, the Rolling Stones when they did a club date at the Elmo Combo.
Yeah.
I think I was the only person who got in either night without a pass. And believe me, I worked hard on that one.
Now, what kind of lens did you go to then to try to get some of these posters to add to what you already have?
I had to move mountains to get a lot of this stuff. At Cornell University in a glass case, it was an old Beastie Boys flyer when they played at the Twilight Zone here in Toronto. And I was prepared to drive there if I had to. Luckily, when I met up with Ron Nelson, he opened up his archive, which is should be in the Smithsonian as far as I'm concerned. And he had some goodies in there, so we made sure that we put some of those into the book. But there was many different sources of all this imagery, many from my personal collection, many from other contributors, and then of course like the library and archive system, I was doing a lot of research there too.
There's a map also. Tell us about the map in the book and what that represents.
So that map actually includes like old venues and new ones. So I've kind of tried to put like everything or as much as we could into that map. So it's a really vast, eye-opening map. It would be interesting though to do a map in stages, like over the years, where you can see, so what were the venues here in the 60s versus the 90s versus today. And sadly, my hunch would that it would be a shrinking stamp of venues. And that's just the way it is today. But it was important to me to have some sort of visual representation of all the legendary live music venues and clubs that sort of dotted the landscape.
I know for me, going through it, it was just reminiscing. I was like, yes, I was there. Oh, I remember the Party Center. Oh, I was at that show. Like, it just brought back so many fond memories of my youth growing up and enjoying the live music scene in this town. Is that what you're hoping that people get out of this?
I think that'll happen to several different generations.
Yes.
I hope personally that it gives people of any age group a sense of how rich and vibrant this city's cultural life always has been. You know, when an artist is doing a showcase tour, they're coming from England or Japan, they're going to play 3 places. It's going to be New York, Toronto, LA. We are so incredibly lucky. We're lucky in a lot of ways to be Canadian and to live here, but we're incredibly lucky musically, and apparently have been since 1840.
I think we're lucky to have this book, man. Job well done,
Thanks,
man.
Dwight.
I really
Cool.
enjoyed it.
Thank you.
A lot of history in there, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Definitely worth checking out. It's a custody battle over Greek gods. Well, statues of Greek gods. Right now, they're sitting on private land on the exhibition grounds. Now, after the break, when Hercules, Hydra, and others could soon be heading back to their rightful home. A years-long standoff over a set of sculptures on the exhibition grounds may be drawing to a close. Toronto's Garden of the Greek Gods has been hidden behind fencing for 5 years, drawing criticism from the public and the sculptor's daughter. But as Farah Morelli tells us, there's new hope the gods will reappear soon.
It's been described as artist E.B. Cox's tour de force. The Garden of the Greek Gods was installed back in 1979. Cox carved 20 sculptures using an air hammer and chisels on massive blocks of limestone. This is what the gods look like today, trapped behind fencing and hardly visible on the exhibition grounds. They've been like this for 5 years now.
My father would be flipping over in his grave right now.
Kathy Sutton is the daughter of E.B. Cox. She says her father meant for the art to be accessible to the public.
It's not right that this public art should not be climbed on by children, which is what it was. One of the biggest intentions of my father was to allow children to climb the art and enjoy it and learn about Greek mythology.
So why are the gods behind fences? Well, to understand that, we need to go back more than a decade. In 2004, the city leased this land to the owners of the Toronto Events Centre, formerly known as Music Nightclub. Mistakenly included in that lease were the statues, and so while technically the city still owned them, they were on the nightclub's land. In 2014, the nightclub decided that they wanted to install a series of swimming pools which required fencing, and which is why the statues look like this.
Over the years, the calls for the city to act grew louder, with accusations the statues were being held as a bargaining chip for a lease extension. All the while, they remained behind fencing.
I think we're at that point right now where they are. We're in agreement that they're going to be moved to the public.
Now, nearly 5 years later, it seems the city and the owner of the club are working together to move them. The fate of the gods was discussed at a meeting of the Exhibition Place Board of Governors late last week. Stakeholders told CBC Toronto they're close to a deal.
I think we're within a few months. Fingers crossed.
I think emotions run deep on this. And there's a lot of strong viewpoints on where those statues belong. And I'm just glad that it's heading towards the right place, a resolution to all of this.
The hope is by next summer, these statues will be publicly accessible just south of where they're hidden now, a location that's seen as fitting for the gods. Farah Morelli, CBC News, Toronto.
Remember, if you have a story you would like us to look into, we would love to hear from you. Send us an email, torontotips@cbc.ca. It can hide who's logging in and what data they're accessing online. Coming up after the break, what is the dark web, why it's not always as nefarious as it seems, and how one major news organization is getting involved. Next, stay with us. We'll be right back. When we think about the dark web, we think about nefarious uses and covert illegal activity, but could it be used for good? Our tech columnist, Ramona Pringle, joins us now. And Ramona, tell us about what the BBC is up to.
Well, they are making the international version of their news site available on the dark web through the Tor browser. And so what this means, it's really an attempt on their part to thwart censorship attempts. So where countries are censoring the BBC News, people could go in through the Tor browser, because of course if you go into a search engine in a country where it's been blocked and search for bbc.com, you're not going to get anything. But if you go using the Tor address of course wouldn't work in a regular browser, but if you go and search it, you'll find what they're calling this mirror version of their site. And it's the international version of the site, so it's the same site you would see outside of the UK. They've got a Persian...
BBC International, yeah.
Right, Persian language services, Russian, Arabic as well.
And a lot of those countries that block that information. You know what our viewers are asking right now, though, what is Tor?
Right.
And how does the dark web work?
Right, because it's a scary place, and who needs to go, let alone, why would you want to access it if
when we think about it, we think about illegal stuff, we think about, pedophilia, all these kind of things on there, right?
Drug deals that are going on. So the dark web, when we use the internet, when we do searches, we're just scratching the surface of what's actually on the internet. For starters, think about even content that's marked as private on social networks or banking information. All of that information is part of the deep web. But then the dark web is part of the internet that's only accessible using specific software. And Tor is some such software. So Tor is privacy-focused software that you can use to access the dark web. And the way that it works is it anonymizes people's behaviors.
So like they can't track you?
Yeah, it obfuscates your location and your identity because it uses a whole network of nodes. So it's hopping around. The website that you're trying to access doesn't see that it's you, but it sees the last person in that chain of
and they can't
computers
trace it back
and
to
servers.
your computer.
No, because there's encryption at every single stage. And this is part of why it's so hard to track. It's why law enforcement has so much trouble tracking what's there, which is why, as you say, we've come to know it for the illegal activity that's there. But it also means those same affordances make it really useful for sometimes journalists, definitely activists, and in this case, people who want to be able to access information outside of their country that's being blocked.
That's interesting. Okay, so how likely is it, do you think, what the BBC is doing then to spark a broader trend where it is used for good and people try to put good information on there?
Well, I think there's some danger that people can come across using it if they're not familiar with it. Yes. We talk about criminals using the space. Even when we talk about journalists and activists, you would think that they have some more sophisticated knowledge of what they're getting into in the first place. But for someone else, they may be just caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, especially when we talk about authoritarian regimes. There may be, just guilt by association that they're even there in the first place.
Searching for something.
Yeah, there's also, this is where so much malware is distributed before it's out on the public web. So there's a lot of concerns. In terms of the spread, I think what's so fascinating, though, is that this particular use case by the BBC is a reminder that, the internet isn't created equal for everybody, that Canadian users don't have the same Netflix shows as American users, that, because of the GDPR and privacy rules in Europe, Google users there European users have a different version of the internet than Canadian users have, or that users in North America have. And when it comes to, governments where there is a lot of censorship in place, it's an even more stark reality.
I feel like we're going to be talking about this more and more.
Yeah, it'll be a really interesting one just to see what does the dark web have a use beyond, beyond what we've known it to be used for to date.
And you've also got to help us with the deep web sometime. Thank you, Ramona.
Nice to see you.
So we're not going to be in costume for the show tomorrow? I'm just going to play a news host, you're going to play a meteorologist? That's so boring, Colin.
It is. I play that every day. We'll see. But we do have some serious weather, so, you know,
it's going to be difficult out there for the kids tomorrow.
Yeah, it is going to be a little bit tricky.
I like it.
Yeah, this is what we're talking about. We know we have got the special weather statement. I've been talking about that throughout the show that's in place. So the rain totals will be around 30 to 50 millimeters. That's by the time it ends as we get Thursday night into Friday morning. By Friday morning, very strong winds. But for those crucial hours, this is between about 7 and 9. Tomorrow, maybe even get out there at 6 p.m. These are the temperatures you're looking at. So yes, rainy conditions. The wind's starting to pick up, but not too bad. And that temperature right around that corridor of 8 to 10 degrees. But as I was showing earlier, Dwight, on our, you know, my little model projections, we're seeing like a little bit of a dry slot, maybe right around trick-or-treat hours.
That'd be so perfect.
Some of you, depending which community you're watching from, may get a little bit of a break and see that window to get out there and get those. Bring us your candy.
Fingers crossed for the kids. And yes, we'll take candy. Thank you for joining us tonight. Stay dry, everybody. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 6.